What if I told you that almost every single thing you do is a lie?
Oh, wow. Starting big today.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and I don't mean just the little white lies you tell your boss or your friends to smooth over a rough day.
Right.
I mean the really big things, like striving for that promotion at work, or meticulously curating your social media feed, or even doom scrolling late into the night, or, the specific clothes you chose to wear this morning.
Yeah, the everyday stuff.
Exactly. What if all of it, every ambition, every distraction, every carefully crafted aspect of your identity is secretly driven by this unconscious, desperate, and frankly terrifying need to ignore one inescapable fact?
And that fact is
that you and everyone you know are going to die.
Well, it is a profoundly unsettling thought, for sure.
It really is.
I mean, we so desperately want to believe that we're driven by logic or, a pursuit of happiness or some innate desire for progress.
Right, like we're the captains of our own ship.
Exactly. We build these incredibly intricate lives, layer upon layer of meaning and routine. But when you peel back those layers, the foundation of all that frenetic activity might just be a frantic attempt to outrun our own mortality.
And that unsettling thought is the beating heart of today's deep dive.
It's a big one.
It is. We are tearing into the architecture of human anxiety. And at the center of our research today is this highly controversial Pulitzer Prize-winning idea from 1973.
Right. Ernest Becker's masterpiece, The Denial of Death.
Exactly. His core premise is that human civilization itself is essentially one giant symbolic defense mechanism against the terror of death.
Which is just a massive sweeping claim.
Totally. And to get a full picture of this, we're pulling from his original writings, plus these really fascinating panel transcripts with modern existential psychotherapists.
Yeah, and we're also looking at decades of laboratory research from Wikipedia and Super Summary that actually attempted to prove his wild theories in a clinical setting.
Right. So our mission today is to map out how this terror shapes us, how scientists have tried to catch it in the act, and ultimately how you can use this terrifying knowledge to live a more authentic life.
Because Becker didn't just write a book about death, He wrote a comprehensive theory of human motivation.
Yeah.
He tried to synthesize the greatest minds before him, people like Sigmund Freud, Søren Kierkegaard, Otto Rank, to explain exactly why we do what we do.
But to understand why we build these elaborate psychological defense mechanisms, we first have to understand the fundamental glitch.
Right, the biological and cognitive glitch that makes human beings entirely unique in the animal kingdom.
The glitch. I love looking at it that way, because it really is an evolutionary paradox, isn't it?
It really is. Becker calls it our dualistic nature.
Dualistic nature. Okay, break that down for me.
Well, drawing from his earlier work, The Birth and Death of Meaning, he points out that humans are forced to live in two completely different worlds simultaneously.
Two worlds. You mean like the physical and the mental?
Exactly. On one hand, we're anchored in the physical world of matter and biology. We are animals.
Right.
We eat, we sleep, we reproduce, we get sick, and eventually our physical bodies break down.
Which is the animal part.
Yeah. But on the other hand, we live in this expansive supernatural world of symbols and meaning.
Oh, I see.
We have language, art, mathematics, complex social hierarchies. So we are, as he puts it, suspended halfway between the animal and the divine.
Which is an incredibly precarious place to hang,
That's basically a tightrope.
Yeah. Let's look at the evolutionary backdrop of that. Evolution endowed us with cognitive complexity and self-awareness.
Right, the big brains.
Exactly. We can project our minds into the future. We can imagine things that don't exist yet and then systematically figure out how to build them.
And Søren Kierkegaard pointed out that this very cognitive superpower is the source of both our greatest awe and our most paralyzing dread.
Awe and dread, two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. We have the sublime capacity to feel connected to what Otto Rank called the cosmic primal force.
Cosmic primal force. That sounds intense.
It is. It's like, you can stand on a mountain, look up the Milky Way, and feel this profound kinship with the entire universe.
It's like you're part of something massive.
Right. But the dreadful downside of that exact same cognitive machinery is the crushing, inescapable knowledge of our own finite duration.
Ah, yeah. Because if you're smart enough to conceptualize the universe, you're smart enough to realize that eventually the universe is going to go on without you.
That is the core tragedy right there. And it brings us to a really visceral concept that Becker adapted from Freud.
Which one?
He called it organismic narcissism, or the horror of our own creatureliness.
Creatureliness. That's a great word.
It is. We are fundamentally terrified of being merely embodied animal.
Right, like we don't want to just be biology.
Exactly. There's this deep psychological revulsion to the idea that we are just biological machines.
Yeah, I think the research had a really blunt way of putting that.
Oh, Becker is incredibly blunt about it. He says we're terrified of the fact that we are basically breathing pieces of defecating meat.
Wow. Yeah.
That we are destined to rot in the ground just like a lizard or a potato.
I have to admit, reading that specific phrasing in the sources was just a gut punch.
A lizard or a potato.
Right. You go to work, you buy a nice coffee, you feel sophisticated and important, and Becker essentially taps you on the shoulder to remind you that beneath the suit, you're just a rotting potato with an ego.
It's rough. It really strips away all the grandeur, doesn't it?
It totally does.
But it perfectly highlights the tragedy of our consciousness. This subjective ego, your vibrant internal world of thoughts and memories, is forced to recognize its own objective demise.
Right.
In one of the transcripts from the panel of existential psychotherapists, there's this heartbreaking anecdote that really illustrates this.
Oh, from Dr. Claude Barbary, right?
Yes, exactly. He talks about a 5-year-old boy who had just learned about the concept of death. The boy was discussing it with his parents, and they gently assured him that when he died, they would miss him very much.
Oh.
But the boy paused, thought about it for a moment, and sadly replied, "You know, I think I would miss myself."
Oh, man. That is devastating.
I think I would miss myself.
But it captures the realization perfectly. It's the profound difference between just not existing and existing with the burden of knowing it's temporary.
Exactly.
It actually makes me think about human consciousness like a piece of cutting-edge software.
Okay, I like that. How so?
Well, you have this program with infinite cloud computing potential, right? It can render beautiful graphics, solve complex equations, write symphonies, love people.
Right, the mind.
Yeah. But tragically, this infinite software is trapped inside a cheap, degrading hardware shell, a meat suit, basically, that is absolutely guaranteed to crash permanently.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to put it.
And the worst part is the software knows the hardware is failing.
Yeah, the software is constantly running diagnostic checks, seeing the battery draining, and realizing there's no charger anywhere.
Exactly.
And that realization triggers the ultimate system error, which is existential dread.
But wait, this raises a fascinating dilemma from an evolutionary standpoint, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because if evolution is just this ruthless game of survival of the fittest, why would it equip us with a level of intelligence that paralyzes us with dread?
Right.
Doesn't walking around having an existential crisis make it significantly harder to survive?
You would think so, yeah.
Like, I would think the caveman who was obsessing over his cosmic insignificance would just get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger while the ignorant caveman just ran away.
This is one of the most robust challenges to this entire framework, actually. And evolutionary psychologists have debated it extensively.
So what's the verdict?
Well, the consensus among those who study Becker's work through the lens of terror management theory, or TMT, is that this existential dread is not an adaptation. It wasn't selected for because it helped us survive. Rather, it's what evolutionary biologists call a spandrel.
A spandrel, like in architecture.
Just like in architecture. When you build an arch, you inevitably create a triangular space between the curve of the arch and the rectangular framework around it.
Oh, right. I know what you mean.
That space is the spandrel. The architect didn't design the building to have spandrels, you know.
Right. They just happen.
Exactly. They're simply the unavoidable geometric byproduct of building arches.
So our high-level intelligence is the arch, and the paralyzing fear of death is the spandrel.
Precisely. The intelligence that allowed early hominids to anticipate the future, to plan for winter, to coordinate highly complex hunts. That intelligence was incredibly adaptive.
Because it ensured our physical survival.
Right. But the cognitive mechanism that allows you to project your mind into next week to plan a hunt is the exact same mechanism that eventually projects far enough to see your own death.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
So the generalized existential anxiety is just the unfortunate, unavoidable byproduct of two highly adaptive traits colliding.
Which are?
Our primal biological instinct for self-preservation and our advanced cognitive awareness of our inevitable demise.
So we have this massive software patch problem. Humans cannot functionally live in a state of constant paralyzing dread about their degrading hardware.
No, we'd never get anything done.
Right. We just sit in a cave and weep. So humanity had to invent a psychological software patch to hide the battery indicator. We had to build armor to protect us from the void.
And this is where Becker introduces his most famous concept, which is the causa sui, or the immortality project.
The immortality project.
Yeah. Since we know we can't save our physical bodies from decaying, we instinctively manage the terror of death by shifting our focus and our energy away from the physical and toward our symbolic selves.
Meaning we focus on the stuff that isn't our meat suit.
Exactly. We try to become the authors of our own meaning. If the physical body is destined to die, the logic goes, then we must invest our identity into something that will outlast it.
And he calls these hero systems, right? Which is a fascinating reframing of the word hero.
It really is.
Usually we think of a hero as someone running into a burning building or saving a cat from a tree, but Becker uses it in a much broader psychological sense.
Right. Heroism, for Becker, is the defiant creation of meaning in the face of death.
So it's about earning what we call self-esteem.
Exactly. By meeting or exceeding the standards of whatever culture we happen to be born into, we feel valuable.
We feel significant.
Yeah. We feel like we're more than just a collection of cells destined for the dirt. And culture acts as a giant collective super go-go in this way.
Providing us with a standardized rubric for heroism.
Yes. It tells you exactly what you need to do to make your life matter.
Historically, the sources say traditional religion was the ultimate unshakable immortality project.
Oh, absolutely. It was brilliantly effective for millennia because it offered literal immortality, like an actual afterlife.
Right.
And it allowed everyone, regardless of their social standing, to find cosmic significance. You could be a lowly peasant or a powerful king,
Right.
but if you followed the religious rules of your culture, your soul was eternally valuable.
But the sources we reviewed note a massive shift during the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason.
Yeah, a huge paradigm shift.
For a large portion of the population, those traditional religiously based hero systems lost their absolute grip, and science can't really replace it.
No, it can't.
Science is great at explaining how a cell divides or why the sky is blue, but it is terrible at giving us a comforting, absolute meaning to human life. It just gives us facts.
Cold, hard facts.
So modern humans are left scrambling to find new ways to feel heroic and immortal.
And that scramble leads to a phenomenon Becker calls transference.
Transference. That's a psychoanalytic term, isn't it?
It is, but he adapts it to explain how we manage existential weight. He argues that people surrender themselves to charismatic leaders, to rigid ideologies, or even to intense romantic partners in order to displace the paralyzing burden of personal responsibility.
Oh, interesting.
Think about the nature of absolute freedom. True freedom is terrifying because the power to make your own choices means you are entirely accountable for the consequences.
Which causes immense existential dread.
Exactly.
Because it's so much easier to just follow someone else's map. If I just do what the leader says, or if I just dedicate my entire existence to making my spouse happy, I don't have to figure out the meaning of the universe on my own.
Right. By transferring our anxieties onto an outside force, we find temporary solace. We shrink our world down to make it manageable.
We project our cares onto a safer, larger, more powerful entity.
Yes. We no longer have to be the masters of the universe. We just have to be a good follower, a loyal citizen, or a devoted partner.
So our self-esteem, our heroic value, becomes tied up in how well we serve that transferred entity.
Exactly. And when we aren't transferring our dread onto a leader or a cause, we're often just distracting ourselves from it.
Right.
Becker draws a sharp contrast between healthy heroism, which we'll get to later, and what he famously calls tranquilizing oneself with the trivial.
Tranquilizing oneself with the trivial. That hits close to home.
Yeah, in the absence of a grand cosmic meaning, people use consumerism, drinking, or just a state of frenetic busyness to numb the anxiety.
Our research points out that from this perspective, mindless shopping and substance abuse are essentially two sides of the same death denial coin.
They really are. They just keep the conscious mind so occupied that the unconscious dread can't creep in.
But let me pause here and challenge this a bit, because it feels incredibly sweeping.
Sure, go ahead.
Does this mean every single hobby, every passion, every little thing we do, like knitting a sweater, collecting vintage stamps, or agonizing over a fantasy football roster, is a desperate attempt to cheat death?
It's a very natural pushback, and it requires a careful distinction.
Because sometimes, isn't a hobby just a fun way to pass a Sunday afternoon?
Well, Becker isn't suggesting that when you pick up a ball of yarn and knitting needles, your conscious brain is whispering, "This scarf will save me from the grave."
Right, that would be crazy.
The physical action itself might just be relaxing or neurologically stimulating. The death denial isn't necessarily in the action. It's in our attachment to the identity that the hobby provides.
Ah, so it's not the knitting itself, it's the psychological need to be the knitter.
That's the crux of it. It's the symbolic self you construct around the activity. You become the creative one in the family, the expert stamp collector, the guy who always dominates the fantasy league.
Oh, wow.
These identities give you a sense of place, of competence, of unique worth. They build up your self-esteem, and that self-esteem is the active ingredient in the anxiety buffer.
That makes a lot of sense.
When you are deeply embedded in your symbolic identity, you feel substantial. You feel like a permanent fixture in the world, which insulates you from the raw, underlying terror of your physical vulnerability.
So our culture, our hobbies, our relationships, they all weave together to form this armor of self-esteem that protects us from the void.
Exactly.
But what happens when that armor doesn't fit? Or worse, what happens when life's circumstances cause that armor to shatter completely?
That's the danger zone.
And this transitions us into a really fascinating and frankly highly unorthodox view of mental health proposed by Becker and his mentor, Otto Rank.
It is a radical departure from traditional psychoanalysis.
How so?
Well, Freud, as most people know, focused heavily on repressed sexuality, childhood traumas, and instinctual drives as the root causes of neurosis.
Right, that's the classic model.
But Becker and Rank threw that out. They argued that mental illness is not primarily a biological or a psychosexual malfunction, but fundamentally an issue of death denial.
Wow.
Becker describes mental illness as a malfunction of the symbolic animal. It's what happens when a person's specific style of denying their creatureliness breaks down or becomes debilitating.
Let's break down how he interprets specific conditions, starting with depression. In Becker's framework, clinical depression isn't just viewed as a chemical imbalance in the brain. It's the overwhelming feeling that one's immortality project is failing, or the sudden realization that it was always false to begin with.
Right.
The depressed person loses their symbolic shield. They look at their job, their marriage, their bank account, their achievements, and suddenly the illusion shatters.
It all feels empty and meaningless.
Exactly. And without that meaning, they're brutally, constantly reminded of their physical mortality and their cosmic insignificance. They are crushed under the weight of their own biology.
The depressed individual is essentially stripped of the vital lie that allows the rest of us to function. They can no longer maintain the illusion that their life has ultimate significance.
That is so bleak, but it makes so much sense in this framework.
And on the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, Becker provides an incredibly unique perspective on schizophrenia.
Okay, let's hear it.
If depression is the collapse of the immortality project, schizophrenia is an extreme, desperate overcompensation.
Because the shared cultural causa, the normal, everyday ways society tells us to be heroes, falls apart for them entirely, right? They can't play the game the rest of us are playing.
Yes, exactly. The schizophrenic individual finds the standard cultural immortality projects either utterly unconvincing or entirely inaccessible. The world feels overwhelmingly threatening.
So what do?
To defend against the terror of existence and death, their mind constructs a purely internal, private reality.
Oh, I see.
In this private, hallucinated world, they have absolute control. They define all the truths, the rules, and the meanings, making themselves a pure, supreme hero.
Like believing they are a prophet.
Right, or that they have secret knowledge that can save the world. It is the ultimate defense mechanism, completely denying terrifying physical reality in favor of a controllable symbolic one.
It reframes severe mental illness not just as a disease, but as a desperate philosophical struggle for survival.
It really does.
And then there's Otto Rank's view on neurosis in general.
Yes, Rank is crucial here.
Yeah. Rank believed that neurosis isn't an anomaly. It is simply the painful struggle of living with the raw truth of existence.
He originated the concept of the trauma of birth.
Right, arguing that being born creates a foundational, lingering feeling of groundlessness. We are ripped from the perfect, warm unity of the womb and violently thrown into a cold, chaotic world of objects and other people.
It's a traumatic transition.
So for Rank, neurosis is essentially a failure of creativity in affirming your unique self in the face of that chaos.
And Rank developed these two brilliant, opposing concepts to explain this struggle. He called them the life fear and the death fear.
Okay, tell me about those.
He saw human existence as being caught in a constant, agonizing tug of war between these two terrors. The life fear is the fear of individuation.
Individuation meaning?
It's the fear of stepping out of the crowd, asserting your unique personality, and facing the isolation, judgment, and vulnerability that comes with being truly separate and alone.
Oh, I get it. And the death fear is the exact opposite end of the spectrum. It's the fear of fitting in too much.
Right.
It's the dread of merging so completely with the collective or losing yourself so deeply in a relationship that you forfeit your unique identity entirely. It's the fear of being swallowed up, assimilated, and erased by the group.
Exactly.
It makes me think of trying to mix audio on a giant soundboard.
A soundboard. Okay, walk me through that.
Well, if you slide the individuality fader all the way up, you get this piercing, brilliant solo, but you're completely disconnected from the rest of the band. You're totally alone.
Right, that's the life fear.
Exactly. But if you panic and pull that fader all the way down, you just become muddy background noise. You disappear completely into the mix. That's the death fear.
Oh, that's a perfect way to visualize it.
You're basically constantly trying to EQ your personality, sliding up and down, trying to find a balance.
That soundboard analogy is incredibly apt. You are constantly adjusting the levels. Rank argued that the truly creative person, the artist, the innovator, is the one who finds a way to balance those faders successfully.
How do they do that?
They assert their uniqueness, they risk the life fear, but they do it by creating something, art, ideas, structures, communities, that connects them back to humanity, thereby soothing the death fear.
Ah, so they bridge the gap.
Right. The neurotic person, however, gets paralyzed at the soundboard. They're too afraid to turn their volume up, but too terrified to turn it down, consumed by the guilt of a life left unlived.
Man. Now, everything we've talked about up to this point is brilliant, sweeping philosophy. Becker won a Pulitzer for it.
He did.
But for a long time, the scientific community looked at this and said, this is great literature, but it's untestable. You can't put existential dread in a test tube.
Right. It's too abstract.
Because philosophy only gets us so far. It's one thing for Becker to claim from his armchair that My Fantasy Football League is a defense against the void. It's another to actually prove it.
Exactly.
Is there any hard empirical data showing that thinking about death actually changes our behavior?
That exact question is what gave birth to terror management theory, or TMT.
Okay, tell me about TMT.
In the 1980s, these three social psychologists read Becker's work and had a revelation. They realized that if Becker's theories were accurate, they should be able to observe the psychological mechanics in controlled, measurable experiments.
So how did they start?
They developed the foundational mortality salience hypothesis, often referred to as MS.
Mortality salience, which is just a very clinical way of saying making people suddenly aware of their own death.
Exactly. The MS hypothesis posits a very simple, testable if-then scenario.
Which is?
If cultural worldviews and self-esteem function as psychological armor to protect us from the paralyzing terror of death, then reminding a person of their death should trigger an immediate, measurable need to fiercely defend those worldviews and aggressively bolster their self-esteem.
And the ways they figured out how to test this are wild.
Oh, they got very creative.
Because they couldn't just ask people, are you afraid of dying? Because people lie, or they just don't consciously know.
Right, you have to bypass the conscious mind.
So they'd have participants write a detailed essay about what they thought would physically happen to their bodies as they decayed. Or they'd conduct the experiment on a sidewalk directly in front of a funeral home versus a normal building.
Yes. Or they would flash the word death on a computer screen for like 20 milliseconds.
So fast it only registered in the subconscious.
Exactly. And the behavioral changes they observed in the wake of those mortality reminders were astounding.
What happened?
Well, when people are reminded of their death, they don't consciously say, I am scared. Instead, their behavior shifts dramatically.
Like how?
They become significantly more punitive toward people who break minor moral rules in their culture. They become vastly more favorable toward people who praise their nation or their values. And most troublingly, they become highly hostile toward anyone presenting a different worldview.
But wait, how do they know the subjects are actually experiencing death anxiety and not just general stress or annoyance from being asked weird questions?
That was the next hurdle. They needed to prove the internal cognitive mechanism. They needed to show that threats to our worldview actually cause unconscious death anxiety to spike.
Okay, so how do you measure that?
This led to the death thought accessibility hypothesis, or DTA.
Yeah.
They needed a way to measure the subconscious mind.
This is where they use those word fragment completion tasks, right?
Yes.
I'm not sure I understand the cognitive priming here. If you give someone a puzzle with the letters COFF blank blank, what is actually happening in the brain?
It's all about semantic networks. When you experience a threat to your psychological armor, say someone insults your political beliefs or gives you a failing grade on a test, your conscious mind deals with the immediate anger.
Right, you get mad.
But subconsciously, because the armor is cracked, your brain's threat detection system starts lighting up with existential anxiety. Death-related concepts begin bubbling up just below the surface of your awareness.
Okay.
So when you are handed that COFF puzzle, a relaxed brain with intact armor easily reaches for the most common word: coffee.
Because you're relaxed.
But a brain whose subconscious semantic network is currently flooded with existential threat is primed to fill in the blanks with coffin.
Oh, wow.
Or SK blank L. Normally it's skill, but under threat, it instantly becomes skull.
It's like a Geiger counter for existential dread. By measuring how many death-related words the participants create, the researchers can literally see the structural integrity of their psychological armor in real time.
It is a remarkably elegant way to bypass conscious denial. And this specific methodology led researchers to explore the terror management health model,
which dives into some of the most fascinating and counterintuitive findings about human behavior I have ever seen.
It's wild stuff.
Because you would logically assume that reminding someone of death would make them act healthier, right? To avoid dying.
That would be the logical, biological survival instinct kicking in, yeah.
But TMT shows that because our symbolic self is the primary defense against terror, confronting physical vulnerability can ironically subvert health-promoting behaviors if those behaviors threaten a person's self-esteem.
Yes. The studies on smoking and suntanning are the perfect examples of this.
Let's look at the smoking study. Researchers took a group of smokers who explicitly based a significant portion of their self-esteem on the act of smoking.
Right. Maybe they viewed it as rebellious or cool, or it was the core of their social identity at work.
Okay, so when the researchers showed these specific smokers highly graphic, frightening anti-smoking warnings that explicitly reminded them of death, it ironically increased their positive attitude towards smoking.
Let's break down why that happens, because it seems completely irrational.
It does.
The warning label presents a profound threat to their mortality. The conscious brain sees the diseased lung and registers death.
Right.
That threat instantly triggers the subconscious need to deploy the anxiety buffer, which is their self-esteem. But because their self-esteem is inextricably tied to the identity of being a smoker, the only way to bolster that armor is to double down on the behavior.
Oh, man. So they mentally reject the medical warning.
Exactly. They convince themselves the science is flawed or that it won't happen to them in order to protect the psychological shield that smoking provides.
The brain literally chooses the identity over the lungs.
Yes.
And the sun tanning study was the exact same mechanism. They told one group of participants that bronze is beautiful and another group that pale is pretty.
They established a cultural standard for self-esteem.
Then they hit both groups with mortality reminders. The people who were primed to believe bronze is beautiful were significantly more likely to express a desire to go tanning, even though the researchers explicitly reminded them of the severe risks of skin cancer.
It's incredible to see it measured like that.
You see this in the real world all the time, too. People refusing to wear helmets on motorcycles because it ruins their hair or makes them look uncool.
Right.
The symbolic need to look attractive or tough completely overrides the biological need to keep your skull intact. The software is literally telling the hardware to risk destroying itself just so the software can feel important.
It is the ultimate triumph of the symbolic over the physical. We will protect the armor at all costs, even if the method of protection actively harms the body underneath.
It's a tragic, fascinating paradox of human behavior.
It really is.
So we've seen how this plays out inside the individual mind, and we've seen it in a controlled lab setting where someone is aggressively doing word puzzles.
Yeah.
But we have to zoom out.
Okay, let's zoom out.
What happens on a macro level? What happens when 8 billion of these fragile immortality projects bump into each other on one planet?
Well, this is where Becker's theories offer a chilling, cohesive explanation for human evil, systemic violence, and the darkest chapters of history.
Right.
If your cultural worldview, your religion, your political ideology, your national identity is the literal psychological shield protecting you from the paralyzing terror of the void,
Then anyone who holds a fundamentally different worldview isn't just someone you happen to disagree with over tea.
No, absolutely not.
They are a walking existential threat. Because if their worldview is right, if their God is the real God, or their economic system is the true path to human flourishing, then your worldview might be wrong.
Exactly.
And if your worldview is wrong, your shield dissolves, and you are left totally exposed to the terror of death.
Exactly the dynamic. This, according to Becker, is the root cause of war, genocide, racism, and extreme nationalism.
Wow.
When immortality projects contradict one another, we cannot just shrug it off. We react with extreme, often violent hostility to reassert our own truth.
We don't historically slaughter other groups of people just because we want their land or their resources?
No, we slaughter them to definitively prove that our heroic narrative is the absolute unquestionable truth. Every war, in a psychological sense, is a holy war over whose immortality project gets to survive and dominate.
The sources connect this directly to the modern era, and it paints a pretty bleak picture of our current moment.
It really does.
Over the last few years, we've lived through a massive global pandemic. We're facing escalating climate crises with daily news of floods and fires, and there's constant geopolitical instability.
Yeah, the baseline stress is high.
All of these things serve as massive, inescapable, constant reminders of our own mortality. We are literally inundated with death anxiety.
And according to TMT, this inundation predictably leads to societal fragmentation.
Because people are terrified.
Exactly. They seek out a heroic leader to transfer their fears onto, which leads to a global surge in populism and authoritarianism.
There is a very specific, famous TMT study that illustrates this political transference perfectly.
Oh, the 9/11 study.
Yes, following the September 11th attacks in the United States, researchers looked at the approval ratings of President George W. Bush.
Right.
The attacks were a massive national mortality salient event. The entire country was suddenly reminded of vulnerability and death. The study noted that his approval ratings soared by roughly 50% almost overnight.
Why? Because the tragedy made mortality inescapable. And Bush stepped into the role of a charismatic leader promising justice, retribution, and safety.
He provided an immediate antidote to that existential concern.
Exactly. People transferred their overwhelming fear onto him, seeking a protective, father-like figure to restore their shattered worldview and assure them that their nation's immortality project was still intact.
Looking at the political landscape today, and I want to be very careful to maintain strict impartiality here, whether we are talking about the far left or the far right.
Of course, we're just looking at the mechanisms.
Right. Are we basically just watching terrified animals fighting turf wars over their preferred immortality projects? When we see intense political polarization where people cannot even speak to their neighbors, does this mean political compromise feels psychologically impossible? Because compromising your worldview literally feels like a little death?
From the strict perspective of terror management theory, yes. That is exactly the underlying dynamic.
That's why
Political ideologies have increasingly come to function as secular religions for many people. They provide a comprehensive black and white explanation of how the world works, who the good guys and bad guys are, and exactly how one can achieve a sense of righteousness or heroism by fighting for the cause.
And when mortality is salient,
Which it is constantly in a 24-hour digital news cycle optimized for threat and disaster.
people cling tighter to their respective sides.
Yes. To compromise isn't just a matter of negotiating a tax policy or a regulation. It feels like surrendering a vital piece of the psychological armor that keeps the dread at bay. To admit the other side has a valid point is to let a crack form in your shield.
It's a grim, almost fatalistic picture of human society. But to be truly well-informed, we cannot just accept TMT as undisputed gospel.
No, definitely not.
As compelling as Becker's theories are, and as fascinating as those lab results seem, the scientific community does not accept this universally. We have to look at the rigorous pushback these theories have faced.
Because the debate is just as interesting as the theory itself.
Absolutely. No theory in psychology, no matter how elegant, is without its critics.
One of the primary ongoing critiques comes from the field of evolutionary psychology.
What do they say?
Critics argue that the fundamental premise, suppressing fear and anxiety, is fundamentally maladaptive. Fear evolved for a reason, to keep us alive.
Right.
Why would a biological organism evolve an incredibly complex, energy-intensive psychological mechanism specifically designed to suppress the awareness of danger? It seems to contradict the basic principles of natural selection.
I see the logic there. If you suppress the fear of the cliff, you fall off the cliff.
Exactly.
But TMT researchers have a response to this, right? The dual process model. How does that actually work in the brain?
TMT theorists counter the evolutionary critique by arguing that we actually have two completely distinct defensive systems operating simultaneously.
Okay, two systems.
The first is proximal defenses. These deal with immediate conscious threats. If a tiger jumps at you out of the brush or a car swerves into your lane, you don't suppress the fear. Your body dumps adrenaline, and you use that fear to run or swerve.
Which is highly pragmatic and adaptive.
Yes. The second system is distal defenses. These deal with the unconscious, abstract, existential threat of inevitable death. The knowledge that even if you dodge the car today, you will still die eventually.
Because there's no immediate physical action you can take to stop death in the abstract.
Right. So you manage it symbolically by retreating into your cultural worldview and seeking self-esteem. So they argue the suppression mechanism is reserved strictly for the abstract threat, allowing us to function day to day without being paralyzed, while our proximal defenses still keep us alive in the moment.
That makes sense. But there's another major critique called coalitional psychology.
Yes, that's a big one.
These critics look at the exact same data from the TMT labs, but they interpret the why completely differently. They argue that what TMT researchers are labeling as death anxiety is actually just a broader evolutionary drive to form defensive groups when faced with any kind of danger.
Right, any threat at all.
If you remind people of danger, they naturally group together and defend their tribe against outsiders. It's not specifically about a fear of the void, it's just basic primate coalition building under threat.
And closely related to that is the meaning maintenance model.
That's that one.
This theory suggests that humans simply despise uncertainty and the loss of meaning in general. We are, at our core, meaning-making machines.
So death is just one way to lose meaning.
Exactly. Death is certainly a massive, ultimate disruption of meaning, but it's just one of many disruptions. If you disrupt a person's sense of meaning in any way, by confusing them, isolating them, or contradicting their beliefs, they will react defensively to reestablish order and patterns.
The sources mention that critics have actually replicated the TMT results, getting people to aggressively defend their worldviews and punish outsiders by using alternative triggers that have nothing to do with death.
Right. They've had people think about being robbed or facing intense social isolation.
Or experiencing intense physical pain, or even something as mundane as failing a critical exam. And these non-death threats cause the exact same defensive posturing.
Which is pretty damning for the death-specific theory.
It really makes you wonder if death is really the master key to the lock, or just one of many keys on the key ring.
The debate over the unique role of death is fierce. But perhaps the most significant challenge to TMT in recent years has been the broader replication crisis in psychology.
Oh, right, the Many Labs 4 project.
Yes. This massive initiative attempted to independently replicate the original mortality salience effects on worldview defense. And this wasn't a small study.
How big was it?
They used 21 different laboratories across the United States and tested over 2,200 participants.
And what happened?
They failed to replicate the effect. Across those 21 labs, reminding people of death did not reliably produce the aggressive worldview defense that the original studies claimed.
Wow, that is a massive blow to the theory.
It is.
Though reading through the materials, I know Tom Pachinski, one of the original founders of TMT, fired back hard against this.
He did. He argued that the replication effort was flawed.
Right. He said they had insufficient sample sizes in the individual labs, and more importantly, that the researchers didn't follow the highly specific, pre-registered protocols required to properly prime the subconscious.
He basically argued that if you don't do the magic trick exactly right, of course the rabbit won't appear.
Still, a failure on that scale casts a long shadow. I'm trying to wrap my head around this whole debate. It feels like terror management theory is a bit like looking at one of those magic eye posters from the 90s.
A magic eye poster?
Yeah, you stare at the static pattern, cross your eyes just right, and suddenly a 3D dinosaur pops out.
Right.
Once your brain is trained to see death denial as the root cause of human behavior, you see it everywhere, in art, in war, in shopping, in politics. But maybe you're just taking generic human stress, generic tribalism, and interpreting it through a highly specific, slightly morbid lens.
That is a very astute way to frame it. TMT provides a powerful, cohesive, and incredibly elegant narrative that explains a vast array of human behaviors. We love a unified theme.
I really do.
But human psychology is notoriously messy and overdetermined. It is highly probable that our behavior is driven by a complex, swirling interplay of death anxiety, a generalized need for meaning, the evolutionary drive to build coalitions, and a simple aversion to uncertainty.
So it's not just one thing.
No. TMT might not be the only engine driving the car, but Becker certainly identified a massive, powerful piston within it.
So having explored the profound depths of this existential terror, the brilliant lab experiments trying to capture it, and the fierce scientific debates surrounding it, we are left with the most important question.
Which is
How do we actually apply this knowledge? We aren't just here to get depressed and stare at the wall.
definitely not.
How do modern psychotherapists use Becker and Rank's insights to actually help people live better, more fulfilling lives?
This brings us to a beautiful application of the theory called existential integrative therapy, championed by practitioners like Kirk Schneider, who is featured extensively in the panel transcript we reviewed.
What's the foundational principle there?
Well, it's a radical shift in perspective. The goal is not to cure death anxiety.
Because, as Becker pointed out, you can't cure the human condition. It's not a disease, it's just reality.
Exactly. Instead of curing it, the therapeutic goal is to help patients find ground within groundlessness.
Finding ground in groundlessness, finding a way to stand firm, to feel stable, even when you know intellectually that the floor is ultimately going to drop out from under you.
It's about transforming that paralyzing neurotic dread into what Schneider calls life-enhancing anxiety.
Life-enhancing anxiety. That sounds like an oxymoron.
It does. But you don't get rid of the terror of existence. You balance it.
Right.
You balance it with wonder, gratitude, humility, and specifically awe.
Wow.
Yes, awe is a critical concept here. True awe is defined as the capacity to recognize our absolute smallness and fragility, while simultaneously feeling deeply, inextricably connected to something vast, incomprehensible, and beautiful.
It's looking at the stars and feeling small, but feeling glad to be part of the galaxy.
Exactly.
The panel discussed a major critique of modern psychology in this regard, drawing directly from Becker. Becker argued that modern psychology and psychiatry often act like a fake religion.
How so?
Well, the medical model tries to cure symptoms, giving you a pill or a coping mechanism so you can be less sad, more productive, and get back to your cubicle. It treats existential dread as a chemical malfunction to be eradicated, rather than addressing the fundamental human condition.
Right.
The panelists argued that therapy shouldn't just be symptom management so you can be a better worker bee. It should be a safe, guided container where you can actually turn and face the fear of the void.
And the panel also touched on some of the most cutting-edge approaches to facilitating that confrontation, specifically the potential of recent psychopharmacology.
Oh, like psychedelics.
Yes, there is a rapidly growing body of rigorous research showing highly promising results using psychedelics like psilocybin to relieve deep-seated death anxiety, particularly in terminally ill patients.
How does a chemical actually relieve a philosophical fear? That seems counterintuitive based on what we just said about pills.
Brain imaging shows that these substances can temporarily quiet the default mode network in the brain, which is the area heavily associated with our ego, our rigid sense of self, and our autobiographical narrative.
Okay.
By quieting the ego, the patient temporarily drops the rigid armor of their immortality project. They often report experiencing a profound, transcendent connection to the universe, a feeling that the boundaries between self and other have dissolved.
That sounds amazing.
It provides a visceral, experiential sense of peace with mortality, showing them that the loss of the ego isn't just a terrifying void, but a return to a larger whole.
That is incredible. A chemical intervention that facilitates a philosophical breakthrough. There's a powerful, quiet story mentioned in the transcript about Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud's daughter, and her very first child psychoanalysis patient.
Ooh, the story about Peter Heller.
Yes, this boy named Peter Heller. Peter was dealing with severe, crippling anxiety. As he was leaving a session one day, having made some progress, he stopped at the door, looked back at her, and said, "Please don't take all of my anxiety away. I may need some of it."
And Anna Freud smiled and replied, "Don't worry, the world will not let us."
I love that exchange. It emphasizes that the goal is not numbness. Some anxiety is actually life-affirming. It's the engine of creativity, of love, of building things.
It is the raw energy of living. If you aren't somewhat anxious about losing the things you love, you aren't truly valuing them.
Right.
And the panelists proposed a powerful solution for how we can channel this energy on a societal level. If our evolutionary trait is hyper-cooperation within our tribe, and our biggest flaw is violently clashing with other tribes over our immortality projects,
then the only way forward is to expand our in-group identity. We need to redefine the tribe to include all of humanity.
Exactly. We need to turn our hyper-cooperative energies toward a global immortality project, like saving the planet or exploring space, rather than fighting localized tribal wars over conflicting smaller projects.
So what does this all mean for us, sitting here listening to this deep dive into the architecture of dread? For me, reflecting on all these sources, it honestly almost takes the pressure off.
Takes the pressure off.
Yeah. You aren't broken if you feel anxious at 3 a.m. You aren't crazy if you obsess over your legacy, or fear being forgotten, or feel an overwhelming need to be part of something larger than yourself. You're just experiencing the completely rational, unavoidable side effects of being a symbolic animal trapped in a physical body.
That is a very comforting way to look at it.
The goal isn't to stop being afraid. You literally can't. The goal is to consciously evaluate your armor. We have to look at our own immortality projects. What are you building to leave behind? Is your hero system healthy and expansive? Does it help others? Or are you just tranquilizing yourself with the trivial, numbing the dread with shopping and scrolling, or worse, participating in a hero system that demands the subjugation of others?
It requires a profound shift in perspective. We've journeyed all the way from Becker's concept of our dualistic nature, the physical animal colliding with the symbolic mind, through the desperate construction of the causa sui, into the laboratories of terror management theory, and out into the macro-level societal fallout of clashing worldviews.
And hopefully we've landed at the therapeutic goal of embracing awe over paralyzing dread.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a brand new thought to mull over. Something that wasn't in Becker's 1973 book, but builds directly on his foundation.
Let's hear it.
If our deepest, most fundamental psychological drive is to create symbolic representations of ourselves that outlast our physical decaying bodies, how does the digital age change the game? Think about our meticulously curated social media profiles. The photos, the opinions, the digital footprint we leave behind. Think about the emerging AI chatbots that are right now being trained on the text messages, emails, and voice memos of deceased loved ones so they can continue to speak after they're gone.
That is fascinating.
Are these technologies the ultimate, literal manifestation of Becker's immortality project? We are now biologically capable of leaving behind digital ghosts that will live forever in the cloud, free from disease and decay. But the question is, will a digital causa sui finally cure our existential dread, or will it just trap us in a whole new, deeply unnatural kind of neurosis? Something to think about.